Before this, they were the associate research professor in physics at the University of Maryland, and also the A.J. Clark School of Engineering instructor, again, at the University of Maryland. They did their BTech in electronics and electrical communications from IIT Kharagpur. And their dissertation research was in computational and analytical modeling. But since then, which was more than 20 years ago, Ayush shifted their work to STEM education research during their postdoctoral work and continued on that trajectory since then. Their work at that time explored complex systems and models of cognition, integrating emotions and identity in undergraduate students' reasoning as they do engineering and do mathematics. Since then, Ayush has published extensively on the culture and practices within engineering education, explaining how power operates within these spaces, producing systemic marginalization of specific learners. So more lately, Ayush has been working on how gender and other systems of power are entangled in who gets to do STEM, who gets to learn science, engineering, and mathematics, and exploring into queer affirming research and development within STEM education. So I've known Ayush for about 20 odd years and heard a lot of talks by them right from the time they were working in hardcore cognitive models of complex systems, moving on to identity and what one learner does when she does physics. I've heard talks on what is engineering and what a learner thinks about what is engineering. I've also more recently heard talks about identity, what is science identity, and so on. So given this background, I'm really excited today to hear this new work by Ayush on queering technology education, or why technology education needs gender theory. So let's all give a big round of applause to Ayush.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Awesome. So I'll be talking today about queering technology education, or why technology education needs gender theory. I really should have said why technology education needs feminism, but that's a talk. And let me start by telling you a little bit about what does the word queer mean. So queer has been used as an identity label for gender and sexual minorities. So it has become like an umbrella term for people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, sexual gender minorities such as transgender folks, gender non-conforming folks, non-binary folks. Queer becomes an umbrella term for people who do not obey the gender rules and gender norms of society. But queer also has a political meaning. It's not simply a term that signifies an identity. It's also reflecting a particular political awareness of fighting for queer rights as human rights, right? And more broadly, the fight for human rights, right? So today I'm going to present to you one perspective on queering technology education, or more broadly, queering STEM education, right? I want to start by saying that queer folks routinely face verbal, physical, and sexual abuse in educational settings. The data I'm going to show is from a report by Sahodharan, which is an NGO that works in Tamil Nadu in conjunction with UNESCO. And this report showed that 33% of queer and trans students drop out in the middle school. So how are we going to talk about STEM education for queer people if most of them are getting kicked out because of harassment and discrimination in middle school? Only about 10% of transgender students reach above 12th grade. This data is specifically about trans students, and this comes from a National Human Rights Commission report. And we can imagine that if 10% in all of 12th grade, far fewer are going to be in STEM. There are very few queer people in STEM. That's because STEM learning environments are mostly hostile to queer people. As I've said, they're facing abuse, harassment, and discriminations, and there is a lack of proper infrastructure to support gender non-conforming and transgender students in our institutions. There's a lack of something as basic as toilet. Now you tell me which learning theory of yours or ours actually builds in that learning becomes difficult if you haven't gone to the bathroom all day because you're afraid of going to the bathroom, not because of yourself, but because of other people. There's a lack of hostel facilities. Many students across India are fighting to have access to safe hostels as transgender students, right? So we need to work on these issues because queer people have a right to education in STEM, and I'm referring to the Right to Education Act in India 2009, and that says that every student in India has a right to education. So if every student has, that should include trans students, right? Transgender students should not be relegated to sex work and begging on the streets. They should be able to become engineers, doctors, scientists, poets, poet laureates, all kinds of things. They have a right to education in STEM. The reason is that when we approach issues of diversity, oftentimes we approach it from a sense of generosity, from a sense of charity. And I don't think that's what we should do. We should do it from a sense of responsibility because those students have a right to be here. And our administration, our institutions, those are the barriers. They are not necessarily the facilitators. We need to convert them into facilitators. Why? Not because we feel sorry for trans students, but because trans students have a right to be here, to be in these audiences, to be in these learning spaces, in these classrooms, in these labs. And here I want to expand our notion of what it means to be queer, because some queer folks are Dalit, right? And some queer folks are women, right? And you might recognize, if you've heard the word intersectionality, that this is sometimes what people say is that, identities sort of like don't come in single packages, they come in multiple ways, but that's not the only meaning of intersectionality. It means that our struggles are linked. So in other words, lower caste folks, cisgender women, trans men, gender non-conforming students and learners and others, we need to join forces to solve this trouble. We cannot be sitting in our silos. And that is the political meaning of the gender theory word intersectionality, that our struggles are linked. So our fight has to be linked, right? We need to work together. And lest we forget, it's not simply about trans students, right? Like, India is not doing very, very good with respect to women faculty, in fact, right? So this one is data that comes from 2022. Muralidhar and Ananthanarayan, they published it in Nature Communications, Nature publication, Communications Biology. They recently have another paper out in Nature that says that only 10% women faculty in top Indian STEM institutions, right? So what are we doing after all of these decades of talking about gender equality? We still, in the top institutions, only have 10% women faculty. The report card for our institutions is not looking very good, is it? It is worse when we get into caste inequalities. Caste representation is a problem in STEM. And this paper is by Ankur Paliwal, again published in Nature. Only 2% of full professors in top Indian institutions are SC, ST, OBC combined. In other words, 98% of full professors in our institutions are upper caste, while the population fraction of upper caste people in India would not exceed more than 30%. I think 30% is actually an overestimate. It's probably around something around 20%. If we look at, we don't have a full-on caste census as of yet, but that's the estimate. So 20% people occupying 98% of the positions in Indian academia. The report card is not looking very good. What I want to say is that diversity and inclusion efforts are not producing representational change, at least not at the pace that we need it. Right? Like, a lot of people are working towards these efforts, and it feels bad if I say that it's not producing an effect, right? The change is not happening, but the truth is the change that is happening is not happening fast enough. And the reason I say that it is not happening fast enough is because people are dying. In India, about 12,000 students by data are committing suicide every single year. We just heard there are 3,000 students at this institution. Imagine if 4 such institutions were committing suicide every single year. That is happening in our country right now, and it is not a scandal. Why is it not a scandal? The change that we want is not coming at the pace that we need it, which means we need the people who are creating change to feel that fire within us. The reason this representational change is not happening at pace is because the change efforts that we are designing are not aiming at systemic change, right? And I want to make this distinction that systemic change demands more than representational change. You see, representational change is about numbers, which bodies are sitting in the seats. Systemic change is also about how the work gets done, right? It's also about who is in decision-making power, what kinds of decisions are being made, right? It's not simply, I'll give you a very quick example, right? Like there was this don't ask, don't tell policy in the US where queer people could not serve in the army. And then that rule got relaxed. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is it a better world if queer people are also going and killing other people in other parts of the world? Right? That doesn't make any sense. Similarly, if we think about the role of militarism in education, especially in technology education, it doesn't make the field better if trans people and queer people were also building weaponized drones. That wouldn't make for a better world. It wouldn't make for a queer-friendly world. So systemic change requires more than representational change. It demands a change in the very practices and values that forms our discipline, right? And what are these practices and values? The practices and values in technology education end up denigrating femininity, right? So lots of studies have been done on this. You can follow the literature. Karen Tonso is one such person who has done extensive ethnographic work on how engineering teams operate in US educational engineering institutions, right? Undergraduate teams. And what Karen Tonso found out was women were systematically excluded from technical roles in undergraduate engineering teams, right? They were relegated to things like writing and management. Now, here's the funny thing, right? In the undergraduate classroom, you can be relegated to sort of like managing the team and note-taking and writing the report. But when that work becomes highly valued as the CEO of a company who's not writing code but managing people, then suddenly women are not let into those positions. Right? So it's a double kind of a sword. On the one hand, women are excluded from learning the technique or getting positions of prominence within their engineering team. On the other hand, when that same work becomes highly paid, they're excluded from those jobs also. This was also documented by Jane Margolis in the issue of computing education, right? Similarly, Erin Seck, Donna Riley, and others have documented how engineering culture in the US, and I bet this is the same thing with India, the culture values competition over collaboration. It values rationality over emotion. It values the technical skill over the social skill, which we sometimes call soft skills. Now, there's nothing soft about being able to talk to people. It is we who are labeling it as soft and feminine. Competition doesn't have to be masculine. Women can also be competitive. So some of the problem is with our language in trying to match collaboration to femininity and competition to masculinity. Rather, I think we need to get down to the reality of the situation, which is why is it that we are valuing competition over collaboration, men and women and other genders, everybody alike, right? And I want to say the second point, that the practices and values in technology education are hierarchical. They're hierarchical in the classrooms, in our departments and institutions, and in research teams. Right? We have PIs in research teams who get to make the decisions, who get to make the budgets. So obviously it is hierarchical, and these all affect how research is getting done, how education is getting done, and how we are running the institutions that manage the research and education. And I want to say that if we want systemic change, we will require not just representation, but over-representation of marginalized folks in the decision-making structures, because unless there is an overrepresentation, they will be overruled, right? So there needs to be a real sharing in the power, not just in terms of rhetoric, but in terms of action on the ground. So with that, I come to my first point about queering research agenda. One of the agendas that we need to take up, we often talk about the gay agenda, right, in the media, presenting you one. Study the structures of power relevant to technology education. This should be one of the big research areas that is taken up by us. Because unless we study the structures of power, we will not be able to alter or change those structures of power towards supporting a more diverse set of people. Today, I'm not going to talk about this research agenda. I'm going to talk about the second one, which is participatory technology education, the sharing in power while managing a research project. How does that work? So I want to say that this call for participation, this call for sharing in the power, this call for that the work needs to be done with all of us together. This is not simply about queer people. This has come from movements across the world, across the spectrum. This is a slogan from the disability justice movement. Nothing about us without us. Right? Similarly, in Black America, there was this call, for us, by us. Right? Indigenous peoples have set a call, don't come to save me. If you want to liberate yourself, then come and work with me together. Same sentiment across movements, that we need participatory. So what does it mean then in technology education to queer this sense of participatory research? So I want to say that what we need to think about, this is the key idea, queer people and politics as decision-making partners, right? So I'm going straight there. We are not trying to include them. I'm not trying to teach people. Decision-making inclusion. That's what should be done. And it should be done in program design. It should be done in curriculum design. It should be done in research design. So all of the aspects of the work that we think about as technology education can involve queer people and politics as decision-making partners. So I'm going to tell you one story of how this transpired for me. I didn't start out here. I started with a project on engineering education. And then as I was learning, I needed to orient it to queer participatory design. And so this is a story for how that happened. The project itself was a research and curriculum development project on technology and society, which we also called macro ethics, right? Not just the micro ethics of don't make up data. Everybody knows making up data is bad. I don't need a whole course on it. But I do need a course to understand how technology interacts with society, how society interacts with technology, and how this shapes. So that's called macro ethics. And this was for undergraduate engineering students. And we wanted to do it via participatory theater activities. So this was a project of Infosys TIFR, and in conjunction with Center for Community Dialogue and Change, who do Theater of the Oppressed, and another colleague of mine, Rajni Ramachandran, who's a psychologist at the University of Calicut. I was the PI, so by the way, power, this allowed me to change the direction of this project. If I wasn't PI, I wouldn't be able to do it, isn't it? But challenges emerged quickly. One is, professional engineers that I talked to were just not interested in macroethics. They were not interested in really thinking about technology and society, unless society becomes a market that I can sell the technology to, right? Like not beyond that. So that caused a problem. How do we do realistic case studies of engineering ethics in India if professional engineers are unwilling to really talk about technology and society? Similarly, the students themselves are getting trained in a very neoliberal education, right? So they themselves have less of a sensibility that we can, for example, partner with somebody who doesn't have a degree. So the students would struggle with that, right? They might be better able to relate with somebody who they think of as a peer, but they're not thinking about the person who's begging on the street as their peer, right? And that's a flaw in our educational system, that we do not see the person on the street begging as our peer, as a poet, as a writer, as an author, as a scientist, as an engineer, right? And in socio-scientific issues or technology and society, there's a huge number of topics. What do I focus on? So I started talking with some queer colleagues, right? And here they really helped. So some of the folks were saying, here's Sayantan Datta, who's one of the faculty at Priya University, told me that technology has been deeply woven in the feminist and queer movements, and we need to look at that as part of the technology education or a technology education research enterprise, right? HIV prevention, reproductive technologies. Feminists and queer scholars have talked about it, activists have talked about it. Tathagat Sen Gupta, another colleague of mine, told me that you should be partnering with transgender community organizers and activists, because unless you're partnering with them, your work will not really go down. You know, it won't catch the heart of queer politics. And Abby Silver-Smith, who's a student, a queer student, said that digital and social networking technologies, they have shaped, and they're shaped by transgender experiences and identities. So various internet forums from Reddit, social media, etc., become spaces where identity formation is taking place. The features of these technology design are shaped both by the identity discourse that is happening in the society, but they also shape that discourse, right? And so these interactions we should be thinking about in technology education. So inspired by these folks, I was also reading, and a couple of papers ended up becoming sort of like instrumental to me. One is by Gautam Bhan, who's a queer rights to understand a community. That's when you can actually work alongside them towards the securing of educational human rights, right? Another paper by Kim Tolbeer, who's an indigenous scholar from the Americas, and Kim Tolbeer talks about research as relationship building. That when we engage in research, we shouldn't think only about the products of research. We should actually be thinking about the kind of relationality that we enter in, and that relationality, again, needs to have a future. Its future cannot be defined by when the researcher's work is done, right? And so the researcher, because our mind is so sort of like structured in thinking in terms of papers and research products and where the careers will go, which CV will be formed, we need to be prepared to be altered. We need to be prepared to revise our stakes in the knowledge that is going to be produced. And in fact, we need to leave our preconceptions of what knowledge is going to be produced, because once we work in participatory ways, that knowledge might change, right? People might have different ideas for what knowledge is valuable. So given this, I partnered with Kolkata, a grassroots transgender organization in Kolkata called Shamo Bhavana. They work in digital security, they work in workers' rights, transgender workers' rights, they work in advocating for human rights of trans people, as well as they work in environmental justice or climate justice issues, because that affects all of us, right? By the way, I love these cloth and biodegradable name tags. I think we can also use the metal at some stage and just tie the cloth to the paper. Love it. So we conducted, based on this partnership with Shamo Bhavana, so now think about it, it's a participatory, it's engineering ethics project, right? Like, I'm thinking about where is this going? Like, we conducted 2 participatory theater workshops with activists from across West Bengal. And we've been like, at that time, it was like, how do I connect everything to technology education? Will it connect? These doubts were there. But I decided that, you know what? I always had a roadmap before in research design, right? And here's a place where both the readings that I'm doing and people that I'm meeting and talking to are saying, let that go. Let go of your map and see where it takes you. So that's what I did, right? So the activists said we should do a participatory theater workshop within the activist circles, and we consulted them. One of the activists that I worked closely with was Raina Roy, and she said that we need a workshop to bring all of the different transgender activists in Bengal together. It was just after COVID, the second, third waves of COVID had ended. People had not met each other. And Raina said that mental health is a huge issue in the community. So whatever we do, we need access to nature because nature is healing. We need arts integration, and we need flexible scheduling. You cannot come up with like that everything starts at this time and that time. That is very hard for people who are neurodivergent, for people who have extensive trauma and can get triggered at various points of time. That also tells us, by the way, these are the kinds of things that we also need in inclusive education. When we think about inclusive education, we aren't really thinking about access to nature, are we? Right? We are not thinking about keeping flexibility, extreme flexibility. 1.5 times of the exam time doesn't cut it, right? We need much more flexibility. And doing this partnership, actually, and letting go of my desire for pre-planning everything, made things easier. So when we were designing activities, we involved the activists the trans activists in the design of the workshop activities. We involved them in scheduling the workshop, the different activities, and we were flexible even to the day of. We kept on changing things. And when we got stuck in facilitation, the participants and the activists came up and co-facilitated. So there wasn't this sharp distinction between who's a facilitator of the workshop and who's a participant. And all of that made our life much more easier. It allowed us to tailor things on the fly to the people that we are working with, rather than having to know ahead of time many of those things, which is not possible because people are unique. So in every single environment, if we work in a participatory way, I think it'll make our lives easier. And the product outcomes from this research, that also prioritized community, right? So instead of starting to think that, okay, now we have this participatory theater activity with trans folks, should we write a paper? Instead of that, we said, how do we design a product that the community will feel proud of, that the community will feel joy when they hold it in their hands? So instead of producing like a research paper, we produced, the first artifact that we have produced from this work is a zine, right? And it's called Theater of the Trans People. We designed it in Bangla. One of the things that we learned was that we can't start with a design in English. That was not working for us. I wanted to explore participatory design, so I wrote participatory design, and then we're like, how do I translate it into Bangla? Doesn't work. Many of our terminologies don't work in translation. So what we did was we reoriented the whole thing. We started the whole design from Bangla, and we said that the English will be the translation. So what you're seeing up here is actually the translation. It's not the first design. And that has helped us a lot in many other projects. We decided the text has to be very much less, and it has to produce joy and pride in the participants. The use of comics as a means of disseminating this workshop was also interesting, because comics are something that people can intuitively understand if we design it that way, right? Rather than text, which is a much more academic medium, right? We have archived this for public use. So we have put it on the Internet Archive because, again, knowledge should be free, right? People should be able to access it freely. And so this one under Dakayani Prakashini, which is a grassroots trans woman-led publishing house. So instead of, again, going to some big name publishers, we are working with Ree, who's a trans woman, runs this publishing house, also designed this zine. So it took a lot of time to design this zine with Ree, but we worked together. So once again, showing you how participatory work means that all aspects of this work, we are working with the community. It's not like we swoop in, do a workshop, then the intellectual part of it is being done in the research team. The intellectual work also is being done in partnership with grassroots, trans women and trans men. So please go look up this zine on internet, on archive.org. But so coming back to, I shared that I was a little bit sort of like skeptical about how this will lead to technology education. But we know that technology is everywhere, right? And so over time, I would hear these things about like how technology is being part of the movement. And so ethnographic notes started revealing that technology, that the grassroots activists who don't have engineering degrees, by the way, they are thinking about technology. They are thinking about how to put technology to their own uses, how it is affecting the movement building, and so on and so forth. So when we think about technology education, the activists should be part of that movement, right? They should also, because they are users and learners of technology. So here are some of the kinds of things that I heard. There were digital security concerns. There are concerns about how social media is being used. There's also a desire to be able to use these tools much more effectively for movement building, for getting funding, for engaging people and the public, right? People also expressed interesting things like they don't have a device, so I need to be able to do all my work on the phone. So applications to various grant lines, for example, people do it on the phone. And that actually built my own resilience for technology. So last year, my computer died in the middle of me teaching a course. And in any other sort of like space, I would have just been like, no go. This, like, I can't teach without my laptop. I can't prepare my slides without my laptop. Because I'd been working with the grassroots trans activists, I knew that people were writing applications on their phone. If they can do it, why can't I? I even have a degree, right? So I started working my course slides on my phone and was able to work through that. The thing that I'm trying to say here in this slide is that technology is deeply a part of the queer movement. And so technology education has to be part of the queer movement. These are the kinds of things that people on the ground are saying and struggling with, right? And so these are also opportunities for us to think about how do we design technology that is actually in the service of grassroots trans folks. And here's where the participatory part comes in, right? We can't do that for them. We will have to do it with them, right? Like all of the folks would have to be involved if this technology education has to become useful. So what I want to, this idea that when I'm hearing these activists, that technology education, see, my typical instinct would have been this. Now, I've heard all of these things about technology use in the movement. I would want to then take the case study to students and be like, hey, can you design a better product? A very typical design problem can't be done. Because the moment I do that, I'm placing the students as the problem solver, and the people in the community are simply there to receive the benefits of this exalted problem solver. And that is the paradigm under which almost all of engineering education is working, right? Participatory design says we can do better and we can do different, right? And so what we need to, so a new learning objective in technology education emerged for me is that students would learn to orient to engaging community members as partners in decision making in problem solving process. So it's very specific. They have to be partners in decision making, not just that come tell us how to do that and then we'll make all the decisions, right? So people need, and that requires a reorientation. It requires we have to see the grassroots person as our equal. We have to see them as leaders. We have to see them as people who we can learn from, not just as a rhetoric. Everybody says, I get to go to the classroom and I learn by teaching, right? But authentically treating the grassroots folks as your partners in this, right? Equal partners. I'm not saying that we as technologists don't know much. We have a lot of technical information, but we don't have perspective, and that perspective develops. That perspective will not develop unless our partners have equal authority on the team. We will look down on them. So students need to learn to see grassroots folks as their equals. Engineering students need to see grassroots folks as their equals. Engineering students in premier institutions, people who we call cream, need to see grassroots folks as their equals. And so this is my first stab at sort of like trying to design such a learning unit. So I designed a learning packet with 3 units. The first unit talks about technology can cause harm. So most often students only think about technology as being beneficial to society. We are going to save the world, right? But technology can cause harm. We are firsthand seeing, for example, how facial recognition technologies are marginalizing. They have a much higher error rate for Black and brown folks. They have a nearly 100% error rate for gender non-conforming people. Think about it. Facial recognition technologies have a near 100% error rate for gender non-conforming people. So when these facial recognition technologies interlock with technologies of access to airports, access to spaces, when they interlock with crime and law enforcement agencies, when they interlock with the justice system, then all of the people who this technology is giving error on will suffer. They will be prevented from access to airports and travel spaces. They will be prevented from access to educational spaces. They might be jailed for no crime of theirs. So this is really important to understand for students. So the first was technology can cause harm. The second is that how do we think about this thing then, right? How do we think about the ethics of technology? And that second unit was participatory design and AI ethics. So we took up AI ethics and we talked about how participatory design needs to happen if we have to make AI ethical, right? And then the third was social media and community-based organizations. So moving students towards participatory design. So in the second unit, we took up this paper that was written by Adrian Williams, Timnit Gebru, and Milagros Miceli. Timnit Gebru, if you remember, was the head of the AI ethics division at Google. And when Timnit Gebru and her co-authors wrote this fabulous paper, Stochastic Parrots, on the ethics of AI, Timnit Gebru was fired from Google. Timnit Gebru is now the director of Distributed AI Research Institute. Adrian Williams, the author of this paper, was a data worker, right, who now is a researcher at the DARE Institute with Timnit Gebru. So think about this. A data worker and the former head of AI ethics division together at the DARE Institute. That's the kind of imagination that we need to bring. So that's why I'm also showcasing this article for students. And this article explicitly talks about how AI ethics needs participation of the data workers, not simply as informants, but as decision makers, right? So that's why this particular article with the students. So students get to read this article, and then they get to reflect via, this is like a case study that we wrote up. So we said that, say you are working at an AI company and you're working on generative AI technologies. Your company draws on large data sets such as ImageNet. You are working on the division of AI ethics in the company, and the head of the division of AI ethics happens to read this Neoma article and wants to take up this issue in the company, wants to address the issue. So she asks you to pull together a list of stakeholders who should be involved in discussions of possible solutions. So then the second unit asks students to really reflect on, who will the stakeholders be? How did you decide who the stakeholders to this discussion should be? Who did you leave behind? Why did you leave them behind, right? Instead of sort of asking them to solve the problem. It's really focusing on how will you make the decision making to share your decision making power. So remember the idea sharing in power. That's what this unit is targeting. And then the third one presented another case. So it said, say you are part of a technology design team. Your team has been working with some community organizers on improving their experience of social media use. The community-based organizations need to document their events and activities on social media for outreach, for building community and membership, and for showcasing to funders. So the interests, we are highlighting the interests of the community members, right? Over some visits, these are some of the comments that you have heard from the community organizers on social media use. So it's that same graphic with a lot of the speech bubbles that we present to the students, but we do not ask them to solve the problem. That's the key thing. We don't say, how can you make social media better? How can you train folks? No, the prompt that the students are going to get is asking them to think about how will you build the team to talk more about this issue? And more specifically, can we get students to really discuss what is challenging or easy to get the community members be part of the design team, right? With decision-making power. So the prompt that we ask the students to think about is, did you or your group, there's a list of prompts and I'm sort of highlighting one of them. Did you or your group consider asking the community organizers to participate in the technology design process with you? If yes, what were your reasons for doing so? If not, why not? Discuss your responses with your group members and write down some brief notes from your discussion. And then the next question was, think of a few ways in which the community organizers could be involved as participants in the design process. Discuss your responses with your group members and make a collective list. Right? So, how much time do you have, Sharma? 40 minutes. Okay, perfect. Awesome. I'll end soon. So this is what sort of all my anxiety that, will I be able to reach technology education if I'm doing participatory theater design or participatory theater activities with transgender activists. Initially, we had thought we will do that participatory theater with undergraduate students, right? And that would lead to all kinds of discussions. We'll do the standard sort of like ethnographic data collection, conversation analysis, and so on and so forth, right? All of that plan got scrapped because now I'm working with the participants in the workshop are trans activists. But the trans activists, their conversations and sort of like following their lead led me to a place where we can not only design an activity for undergraduate engineering education, but we can actually add targets to undergraduate education, learning outcomes, where the learning outcomes are not necessarily preparing engineers who design, but it is about preparing engineers who share in the power with folks who currently don't have that power, right? That's the kind of future engineer that I think we need in order to have a more equitable technology education. Now, this project led to all kinds of other things. Now there's a whole ecosystem in Calcutta that I have become part of, and we are being able to do many new projects. So it has spurred new projects. I'll share a few of them. The first one is thinking about the community-based organizers as folks who have technology education needs. And if they have technology education needs and we have something to offer, then I think that that's a really good scope for partnership. And it leads to research questions such as, how is the changing technology landscape impacting the work of transgender CBOs in West Bengal? I'm working in West Bengal very specifically. And second, what are the technology education needs of transgender CBOs in West Bengal? So when we think about who is the learner of technology, I think either we think about learning environments that are in these institutions, or we think about the public. And I think the public doesn't help. We need to get much more concrete. We need to think about who are the actual people who are our partners, and they cannot be nameless and faceless public, because that's when once again we are exalting ourselves into this space where we will teach the public, right? We are creating this kind of a stage kind of a thing. And we need to not do that if we want equitable technology education, if we want queering technology education. So the second project that we are working on is technology and trans rights. You see, technology is getting infused in all of the ways that human rights are being conceptualized, structured, disseminated, fought for, right? And we need to think about how this would affect the grassroots trans folks. So we organized a seminar session with grassroots trans activists in West Bengal on technology and our rights, and we talked about things like, how do you think inclusion of technology in policing might impact Hijra Kothi transgender folks, right? What are the risks that are entailed in government surveillance, and what level of surveillance is justified? And one of the things that we found out in the discussion was, there is no consensus among the trans activists. It's not like all of the folks who are like somehow having a trans identity are saying the same thing. They have lots of different ideas about the merits and demerits of CCTV technology or facial recognition technology, how it is being used for us, whether we should be using it, whether it should be used on us. People have different opinions. So we need to explore that more, and we need to think about how can the grassroots be empowered with technology education so that they can better fight for their rights. The third project that we are launching is programming for people. So this again started out as a community conversation. I've mentioned Abigail before, a trans woman student who was kicked out of St. Joseph's after sexual assault, and the head of the department at St. Joseph's told her that if you're dressing like a woman, you should expect to be raped. If you're dressing like a woman, you should expect to be raped. That's a statement of the head of the Department of Mathematics at a prominent university in India. This was published in Indian Express. That's Abigail. And Abigail tells me that it would be fun to teach Python programming again. So I talked to Ree, who designed the zine with me, another trans woman in Kolkata, who was kicked out of another prominent institution, NID. And so Ree's education is also disrupted, but Ree has taught herself programming, web design, so on and so forth, and so giving lots of ideas. And Ree is saying that there's a lot of young trans youth, Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi trans youth, who are not getting the technology education that they need. So we need to have really top class. We should aim for high quality computing education for the grassroots, not something that trickles down, but that is something that is designed and born from there. And it should use some of the best pedagogy that is available in the world. So I had been teaching for over 10 years at University of Maryland, College Park, in their Keystone program, Introduction to Engineering Design. And there we had been doing Arduino-based programming, and I saw firsthand that learning programming on a screen is really boring. Writing Hello World programs and solving Fibonacci sequences, really boring. Hanoi, Towers of Hanoi, really good when you're a 3-year-old. Not good if you have to solve it on the computer screen. Like, no. But building with your hands and being able to see an object react to the program, you tell a little car to go forward and it turns, and now you're like, why is it turning? Didn't I write the code to make it move? That is the heart of programming education. When the world gives you feedback, not simply a screen. And that education, that pedagogy needs, why should the grassroots people be excluded from that? Why do they have to go to University of Maryland or IIT Bombay in order to learn that? That shouldn't be fair, because those doors are closed for them. It'll take too long to open those doors for them. We need to take this right now to the people. And so Keith, another trans man from Kolkata, Abby, Ree, and me, I'm the one in this video trying to record lectures from my one-bedroom apartment in Kolkata. And we have a very doohickey setup with a camera pointing down and some lights. And we are trying to teach circuits and programming from an integrated perspective using the Arduino microprocessor, which has a very low threshold for entry, which has a global community of people who are discussing online various troubles when they happen. They are seeking each other's help. So it's a global maker community that Arduino has fostered. It is also very easy to learn and get into it. Getting an Arduino to blink an LED is much simpler. It's very easy to get into that compared to, say, solving the Fibonacci sequence. I don't know why I'm hating on the Fibonacci sequence, but that I really think that computer programming can change if it is microprocessor based, right? And so now we have 4 videos. We have not yet produced them on YouTube because we want, the whole video, by the way, was produced in Bangla. We did not use English. And when we were writing these cards, we wrote some in the Bangla text, but I can't write Bangla text very fluently. So if I needed to write during the lecture some words, I would write in what we call WhatsApp Bangla, which is that the script is English, but the language is Bengali, right? And that's, so Bengali first, right? Because that's what our audiences are at. And we have put up this unlisted. We are currently in the process of generating captions in Bangla and in English. We also want to think about making it accessible in various ways. For example, like over time, we also want to work with disability justice activists to add sort of like sign language inset onto these videos. Everything that we produce needs to be as widely accessible as possible, because queer people are disabled too. A trans movement, a trans education would be, a trans inclusive education would be hollow unless disabled folks are included in it, unless cis women are also included in it, unless caste minorities and caste oppressed people are included in it. So we need to do that extra labor, I think, to get there. It should not be thought of as extra labor. It should be thought of as necessary work that we need to do in order to make our research accessible. So with that, I want to come to 3 final points. The one point I want to say is researchers need to step outside the academy. And look, I know that people partner with various community groups and do their work there, but that's not what I mean by stepping out. I really mean stepping out. Right? In the sense that, do we really think about those community members who are sometimes where we do our projects as friends, as colleagues, as mentors, as our guides, right? As our mentees, a full-on relationality with the folks where we eat with them, laugh with them, where we hang out with them. They are our friends, they are our colleagues, as well as co-learners, right? That's what stepping outside means. It means that releasing our agenda as academics in order to prioritize the agenda of those who are marginalized, right? It's a shift in the motivation. It's a motivational shift from our motivation to we center other people's motivation. I also want to say that participatory methods as a technology learning goal. So this is what I was saying before with respect to designing curriculum for undergraduate engineers. We need not simply to teach engineers to be technologists. We need to get them to understand not how power is shared, how power works, and have a commitment to sharing that power. That's what I think should be a learning goal in technology. And finally, I want to say that doing this kind of work will put people at risk. My work is threatened at my institution. I'm being disallowed from doing this kind of work. For example, a kind of argument that is coming up is, if you're working in a Kolkata ecosystem, then apparently you're not doing research because your research should be inside of the institution. Students are being systematically prevented from going and working in research sites. Why? Because they need to be stuck in the institution, right? We are being told, last year I wanted to open up my course, I got an email from the director saying that I should not be catering to students who are outside the institution, right? These are barriers to doing participatory research. These are barriers to doing inclusive technology education. Leaders of institutions will have to understand that when we do this kind of work, it will require budgeting differently. It will require doing the research differently, right? In this theater project, I had a research staff position, but I was prevented from hiring grassroots trans folks because they don't have the requisite degree. Now Ree has designed that magazine. Abby, Ree, and Keith, we are designing program for instruction, but they will not have institutional status. So what I want to say is that if we need participatory research in India, then the institutional leaders would need to understand that this will require different kind of work, and they will need to stop harassing and hampering the people who are doing this kind of work. And that harassment and hampering and persecution is happening. So because this kind of work is political. So with that, I want to say thanks. Thanks to Ree, who also helped with the slide design, the grant, Infosys TIFR for giving the grant for this work, and various consultants along the way.
Thank you. Okay, thanks, Ayush, for all those ideas, which are somewhat new, I think, for this audience. We have just 5 minutes, so maybe one or at most 2 questions now. But the good news is that Ayush will be there for the rest of the conference, so you can catch them during the tea breaks and later in the evenings. So any questions? No, we are all thinking about. Yes, okay, we have a question there from Shuchi.
Thank you so much for such a thought-provoking talk. It's good to see you again.
Yes,
I just very quickly getting to a very broad, big question. So many of these things that you have sort of offered as things we need to do involve a societal mindset. Society has to change, the mindset has to change. Saying that involve people or see them as peers, I think it's easier said than done. So what might be some ways in which, can tackle something at a very foundational level?
I think that's a really critical point. Like, if you're going to do this work, society has to change. But then I have to ask the question, what is society? Who is society? And the truth is that society is both outside and inside. The society is also sitting here, right? The society is also standing here. And so what can be the best place to start? Here. Because then I don't have to go anywhere, isn't it? So if I want a societal mind change, I start with us. I start with me. I start with the research group that I have. I start with the students I'm working with. I advocate for this mindset in the institution. And when I'm sitting in institutional committees, that is going to not be easy because people in power might not like this. So the other thing, to answer your question, Shuchi, is that the change of that mindset has to begin here, but it's not going to be easy. And what I mean by not being easy is not simply some philosophical trouble. It is that it will require a fight. You will have to fight the people in power to make such a societal change happen. Because if we look at the history of movements, no societal change has happened without a fight, without a struggle, without protesting, without challenging people in power, without losing jobs. How do we think that the inclusive movement in technology education will happen unless those things happen here? So that's, I don't know if that answers entirely, but yes.
Okay, we have a question there from Lakshmi.
Thank you so much for your talk. So I have a question. When we have gender studies, it generally could be that they lead to certain stereotypes. This again goes against this thing of inclusiveness. See, we do gender studies to be inclusive, but gender studies, if not done well, could lead to stereotypes, which again goes to this inclusiveness. So what are your thoughts? How do we get away from this vicious cycle?
Yeah. So I'll just quickly explain that vicious cycle. There's an example there, right? Like when I'm tagging, for example, like I want more women's inclusion in technology, right? And then what we will do is we will tag some idea of soft skills as more feminine, and then say that, oh, we should target that and get more women into technology or something. That's an example of the circular badness that you're talking about. So when we are thinking this, gender theory poses this problem. In fact, even in terms of queer and trans folks, right? On the one hand, I'm saying that genderqueer folks don't want to fit into the box of man or woman. On the other hand, gender theory constructs yet another box for us to go and sit in. The trans box, or the L box, or the B box, or the T box, or the A box. The number of boxes is proliferating, right? Faster than nuclear arms at times. And what we need to do, I think, is like careful read of gender theory would say that for movement building, we might need some affinity labels. We might need in order to co-organize, but let's not make it real. I might need at times to argue that I need more collaboration in this space from an angle of femininity but let's not think that that is real, because men can collaborate and women can collaborate. Men can compete and women can compete. Those who are not men and women can also compete and can collaborate. These are human ideas, but so that's, I think, the reworking of gender theory that we really need to be careful about, is moving away from identity-based reasoning to really thinking about what is in front of us. How do I want to change that which is in front of me in order to make a better world?
Okay, and I think I'm going to use my privilege with the mic in hand to ask a quick question. You said you worked with undergraduates on that course. Can you say a little bit about their responses? Because they're the next generation, and are things changing? If there's anything we can hope from them.
Yeah, so the participatory design, I delivered it as a 3-hour workshop to undergraduate science and engineering students in Kolkata. It was a program organized by the Jagdish Bose National Science Talent Search. There were about 52 students there. And look, I mean, for many of these kinds of things, I don't think that the learning outcome is you get this and then check mark, my learning outcome achieved. But students has fabulous discussions about, for example, when we presented the NEOM article, they had this discussion, can a company actually pay fair wages to the data workers? Can an AI company pay fair wages to the data workers, or will that be a death knell for the company? That led other people to argue, is the company entitled to live on and exist if it has to subsist or draw on exploitative labor? If it has to convert people to work into, to work for really low wages in order for it to exist, does it have a right to exist as a company, or do those people have a greater right to exist with dignity, with fair wages? Fabulous discussion, no resolution reached, lots of things in the audience. When we went to the participatory case study, for example, a lot of students had lots of ideas for how we can fix the problem, right? But also about how we can talk to the grassroots activists, what we can learn for them. But they did not go to the stage where they would sort of like say that we want them to be equal decision-making partners. That was difficult. So based on that experience, I've revised these units a little bit to push on that point really stronger, added the first level unit on technology can cause harm, and and we'll need to see a little bit more. But getting this participatory, meaning if I could get undergraduate students to move to participatory design in 3 hours, we would have solved many more world problems. But that's the answer.
Okay, so thank
I
you
want to add
very
one
much.
more thing. I think students are interested. That students had that big debate, right, meant that students, if they get the space, they can talk about these things. They are interested in these things. What they don't see is how these conversations are linked to their future career, which is going to be a capitalist world where this participatory design may not work. We also have to build those linkages for how participatory design can be part of students' future trajectories if we want undergraduate students to take this idea seriously.
Okay, so we're going to have to close this session here. And as a small token of appreciation, we'd like to hand this to
Thank you.
Professor Ayush Gupta. And let's give them a big round of applause again. So thank you all for this talk. And I hand it back to the LOC.
I invite Chair Krishnan to the stage, please.